Bikes are over 200 years old, but yet remain one of the most commonly seen forms of transportation today. Let's learn the physics behind it. In Unit 1, we learned about the 5 equations of motion. The one I was most focused on was equation 3, since I wanted to find my acceleration on my bike. I knew that this equation required distance, initial velocity, time, and acceleration. So I started by measuring about 5 meters of distance. I knew that initial velocity would be 0 since I was starting from rest, so I calculated how much time it took me to ride this distance and isolated for acceleration. It took me 1.11 meters per second squared forward. The next thing I wanted to do was find the force of friction the bike exerted on the ground. So I found the coefficient of friction from the textbook. Then I found the approximate mass of me and the bike together, and I calculated it to be about 61.24. I substituted all these values into the equation and found the force of friction. During my ride, I looked down at my wheels and realized that the wheel was in a non-inertial frame of reference. This would mean that centripetal force would be acting on the wheel as it rubbed against the ground. So I tried to calculate that. For starters, I drew a rough FBD of how the wheel would look and the forces acting on it. Then I measured my wheel to get the radius, and I realized that the period was 1 because it took 1 second for the wheel to make a full turn. I then had all the values I needed to solve for centripetal acceleration, and I used the mass that I just used to calculate acceleration, substituted it in, and found centripetal force that the wheel exerted on the ground. As I continued my bike ride, I found a hill, and I started thinking about the law of conservation of energy. It says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It only changes form. And I realized that there's 2 different energies that I was using to go up and down this hill, kinetic and potential. As I was going up, I realized that I had kinetic, and as I was coming down, I had kinetic energy. But when I stopped at the top, while I wasn't moving, I had potential energy. And I thought I could use this law to find my final speed going down the hill. Because it was hard to get the actual height of the hill, I assumed the approximate height just for the calculations to be a little easier. Because I know that the law states that the energies are equal, I made my potential energy equal to my kinetic energy, and I realized that the masses canceled out. I was then able to rearrange the equation to solve for V, and I found that my final speed was 17.15 meters per second going down the hill. Now let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of biking. For starters, it's great for the environment because it doesn't give off any carbon emissions. Next, when you're biking, not only is there less traffic, you're free to roam more places because you're not restricted by a highway or a road. Not to mention, it's much cheaper. You never have to pay for gas of any kind or parking. However, there are some disadvantages to biking as well. Bikes are much easier to steal than a car, for example. However, this problem can easily be solved by purchasing a bike lock. Another problem we face is climate. Although it's hot and sunny right now, we live in Canada, which means that it's cold and windy for most of the year. When the ground is covered in ice and snow, biking conditions become almost impossible. The last problem is practicality. As you can see, biking would take me 10 minutes, which is double the amount of time it would take me to drive if I were to get to school. I wanted to find my speed that I would need to maintain if I was going to school, according to the time that Google Maps gave. So they said it would take me 9 minutes, which I transferred into seconds, and 2.6 kilometers, which I transferred into meters, just so I could use the equation of motion, because I needed to match the SI units. I used the second equation of motion, I substituted in for distance and time, and I knew that my initial velocity again was 0 since I was starting from rest. I rearranged the equation to isolate for my final velocity, and I found it was 9.63 meters per second forward. Now, let's talk about types of careers. There are 3 different career paths you could follow in biking. One is an everyday, one is athletic, and one is a professional career. Let's start with the everyday one. The first one is a bike messenger. You can work for a company like Uber Eats to deliver food. If you're more athletic, you could compete in the Tour de France. It's a bike competition in France where the winner can take home $2.3 million in euros. If you're more interested in the inner workings of bikes and the bikes itself, a professional career in engineering or a job as a bike mechanic may be more suitable for you. This way you could help improve the future of biking for everyone. But what does the future have in store? Well, inspired by the electric car, the new thing on the market is called the e-bike. It's an electric bike that will allow you to carry more force and travel a greater distance without getting tired. It's going to help to revolutionize the world of biking for everyone. Now let's talk about the impacts of biking. Starting with the environment. Besides the initial environmental cost of production, bikes give off no carbon emissions. By biking, you will help to lower your carbon footprint. In terms of the economy, it is much cheaper to own a bike than a car, for example. It doesn't require any sort of fuel or monthly payments and is ready for use at any time. The only investment you would have to make is in protective devices like a helmet or a bike pump to make sure that those tires stay filled, but both are a very cheap one-time purchase. In terms of the social impacts, biking is a very fun activity that it has amazing health benefits as it's great cardio. There are many biking clubs that encourage the social interaction among people in your area who share a love of biking just like you. Biking is a very simple activity that never fails to bring everyone together. That's all for me. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've learned something new about this 200-year-old invention that you see almost every day.